Psalm 83. Is it a prophecy, or is it, as some teach, simply a prayer? And if it is a prophecy, has it found fulfillment, or does it still remain unfulfilled? And if it remains unfulfilled, when will it find its final fulfillment? In this video series, we're going to take an in-depth look at this controversial psalm, so stay tuned. I call the psalm controversial because today's top scholars are all across the boards with different views and interpretations. For me, I believe it's a future war prophecy. Many subscribe to this. I actually believe it's a pre-tribulation future war prophecy. But there are some who say the Psalms are not even prophetic at all, or that it's only a lament prayer. Some say the people groups don't exist anymore. Some say it was already fulfilled historically in 2 Chronicles 20. Some suggest that there's no prophetic language in the psalm that indicates it's even prophetic at all. Some say it was fulfilled in the wars of 1948 or 1967, or that it will be fulfilled with the Ezekiel 38 prophecy, or perhaps even in the Armageddon campaign. So we're going to address all these objections in this video series. Before we tackle the objections, let's take a look at the objectives of this video series. I'm going to introduce and explore Psalm 83, explain why it's a prayer and a prophecy, connect the correlating prophecies that give us more details from the other prophets, like Obadiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel per se. We're going to identify the pre-tribulation timing of the psalm. We're going to address those objections, of course, reveal the various phases of Psalm 83, and locate the present phase that we're underway right now. And we're going to unveil the aftermath events as well. Now, if this psalm is an unfulfilled pre-tribulation future war prophecy, as I and many others believe, it's very relevant for our time when you take a look throughout modernity at what's been happening in the Middle East, because the psalm speaks about a confederacy. It comes together, and you see a list of the names of the modern-day equivalents identified in the psalms. You have Lebanon, where Hezbollah are, on the right-hand side there, Syria, Jordan, the Palestinians, Saudi Arabia, Gaza, where the Hamas are, Egypt, Iraq. This confederacy comes together, and we're told in Psalm 83:4, their goal is, they have said, come and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be remembered no more. Verse 12 tells us that they want to take for themselves the pastures of God, the promised land, for possession. So in my estimation, if this prophecy is for our time, it's about the Arabs wanting another Arab state, no Israel, but another Arab state called Palestine. Now you see the image there with the tents of the refugees. Those are Palestinian refugees back in 1949. And they're identified, in my estimation, in this psalm as the tents of Edom in Psalm 83, verse 6. So before I dive into the details of Psalm 83, I want to give you a little historical background of how I became acquainted with Psalm 83. Back in the early 2000s, I read a fantastic book by scholar extraordinaire Dr. Arnold Fruchtenbaum called The Footsteps of the Messiah. And inside of the book, he talked about Psalm 83, and he considered it a future war tribulation prophecy. Now, at the time, Dr. Arnold Fruchtenbaum had his ministry, Ariel Ministries. You can reach them at ariel.org in Irvine, California, and I got to share several luncheons with him and some seminary students and pastors, and we could ask him all kinds of questions. And of course, my questions were centered quite a bit around Psalm 83. So we had several luncheons, and then one evening he invited me to be on a panel of a video he was doing in a front room setting called Why is God Still Saving the Gentiles? And then after that panel discussion, we had some snacks, and I continued to ask Arnold, why do you put this psalm into the tribulation category? Which, by the way, I've since convinced him that it's a pre-tribulation event for the reasons I'll be sharing with you later in this video. But anyway, the outcome of that meeting was he said to me, Bill, you should write a book on Psalm 83. So I took that to heart. I prayed about it, and I thought, God, are you calling me through one of my favorite Bible prophecy teachers to write about Psalm 83? So at that time, my wife Tony and I were operating a successful mortgage company with multiple branches in Big Bear Lake and Lake Arrowhead, California. So writing a Bible prophecy book was probably the furthest thing from my mind. but I had accumulated through early morning studies before I'd go to work volumes of notes on Psalm 83 and related prophecies. So when Arnold Fruchtenbaum suggested maybe I should write a book on the subject, I took it to heart and thought, well, I can take those notes and in my spare time I can write a book. So over a period of a couple of years, I did just that. And in 2008, I birthed a book called Israelistine, the Ancient Blueprints of the Future Middle East. And basically it says boldly unveils significant Bible prophecy that has eluded the discernment of today's great scholars. Once upon a foretold time, the Jewish people were to meet with a Holocaust-type condition, out from which they would return back to their ancient homeland of Israel. They would begin as refugees, but promptly emerge into an exceedingly great army. As for Psalm 83, destiny's design for this great army is a head-to-head confrontation with the formidable Arab Confederacy. So when Israelistine was published, it promptly jumped to the top as an Amazon bestseller in the Bible prophecy category. Matter of fact, you can still get the paperback or the Kindle edition or even the audiobook through Amazon.com. But more importantly, it created a stir in the prophetic community among the top scholars. Subsequently, after reading it, Hal Lindsey started teaching on Psalm 83. David Reagan with Christ and Prophecy started teaching on Psalm 83. Chuck Missler actually came out with a DVD called The Magog Invasion, an Alternative View. He did something very interesting. When he first published that DVD, he came out in front of the audience and said, I'm going to do something no one has ever told you to do before, and that's not buy my Ezekiel 38 DVD. I want you to buy this one, The Alternative View, which is dealing with Psalm 83. More so, we had Prophecy Watchers, Gary Stearman, Monica Gonzalez, Tom Hughes, Brandon Holthouse, and many others starting to talk about Psalm 83. So here's kind of a case in the point. A real buzz was created when this book came out.
Well, brother, you must have been studying nonstop. I mean, it's hard to believe that you become a Christian in 1992 and already have a best-selling book on Bible prophecy.
This is true. I was just fascinated every morning before I went to work, about 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, spent a couple hours studying prophecy. And
so you hit the ground running trying to make up for lost time, huh?
I did. I was just so intrigued.
Well, I tell you, that's an amazing story, Bill, and to me, there's only one answer to what has happened, and that is that God gave you a supernatural anointing to understand Bible prophecy, to be able to explain it to others, and to give you some insights that you just couldn't have gotten that quickly studying Bible prophecy.
Well, thank you, David. I feel very blessed that God met me in those studies, and those studies turned into chapters, and now we've got a book.
Well, let's get to your book here for a moment, because I tell you it is something else, and I want people to realize how important this book is.
That video clip with Dr. David Reagan was recorded in 2009, just 1 year after I released the Israelistine book in 2008. But then in 2011, there was the Arab Spring. And meanwhile, I had accumulated some more insights on Psalm 83 that I wanted to share, and also address some of the objections that were circulating at that time regarding my teaching on Psalm 83. So in January of 2013, I released a second book called Psalm 83, The Missing Prophecy Revealed, How Israel Becomes the Next Mideast Superpower. Now, these two books piqued quite an interest in the prophetic community about the topic of Psalm 83, and I was invited to travel across the country and even parts of the world to teach at various churches and conferences about Psalm 83 and Bible prophecy. Additionally, I was invited to be on almost every major Christian television network and show, like TBN, Daystar, Jewish Voice, CBN, Prophecy Watchers with Gary Stearman, Understanding the Times with Jan Markell, and many other shows. And additionally, I was asked to debate some of today's top scholars, like Tommy Ice, who was one of the critics of some of my teaching on Psalm 83. Here's a little clip about that debate.
The controversy centers around Psalm 83. It began in 2008 with the publication of this book, Israelistine, by Bill Salus. The thesis of this book is that Psalm 83 describes an end-time war between Israel and the nations that share a common border with it, namely Lebanon and Syria, Jordan, Egypt, and the Gaza Strip. Bill Salus theorized that the Israelis would win this war overwhelmingly, resulting in peace for their nation. But the peace would be short-lived because the Arab world would turn to Russia and the Russians would come down against Israel with certain specified Muslim allies in what the Bible calls the War of Gog and Magog, described in detail in Ezekiel 38 and 39. Russia's Muslim allies will be made up of an outer ring of nations with no common border with Israel today. The Psalm 83 war, on the other hand, would be one between Israel and the inner ring of nations that surround it. So, what about it? Is Psalm 83 a prophecy about an end-time war that could occur any moment? Or is it describing something else? I contacted Bill Salus and his major critic, Tommy Ice, and asked if they would appear on this program and present their arguments, and both graciously agreed to do so. We are going to begin with Tommy Ice presenting his objections to Bill's thesis, and then Bill will respond. Tommy Ice is the director of the Pre-Trib Research Center that you can find on the internet at pretrib.org. This website contains a treasure trove of articles about end-time Bible prophecy. Here now is Tommy Ice.
I wanted to provide you with this historical background about my familiarity with Psalm 83, not to toot my own horn or acknowledge that David Reagan may be correct with the supernatural anointing, but to let you know when it comes to Psalm 83, I'm very familiar with this topic, and I do sincerely believe that it is a future war prophecy. It's yet unfulfilled. But I'm not the only one with this sentiment. I'm going to close this part one of this video series with some quotes from some people who agree with me on this. It's a future war prophecy. Some of these are scholars who even wrote about this before I came out with my books. I'll start with a quote from Dr. Henry Morris, who was one of the founders of the Creation Research Society. He writes in his book entitled The New Defender's Study Bible, which goes back as far as 2006, he writes the following: "The intent to destroy Israel completely has become a firm policy of the Arabic Muslim nations arrayed against Israel today, not to be compromised by any deceptive peace process. The nations enumerated in Psalm 83 verses 6 through 8 were those immediately surrounding Israel, all joined against her in Psalm 83 verse 5. The prophecy primarily applies to the end times, since their defeat will be forever and will result in men acknowledging Jehovah as supreme over all the earth." Psalm 83 verses 17 through 18. And we'll be going, in the next segment, we'll be going through all those verses that he's alluding to right there. So he clearly is putting this as an end times event, an unfulfilled future war prophecy. Now I want to turn your attention to a quote from another scholar, Merrill F. Unger, who lived between 1909 and 1980. He was a respected professor from Dallas Theological Seminary. He authored some 40 books. And in his Unger's commentary on the Old Testament with the publication date of 2002, he writes the following about Psalm 83. This psalm is the last of the Asaph series, Psalm 73 through 83, of which prophetically glimpsed Israel's future trouble and deliverance into kingdom blessing. However, no such comprehensive anti-Israel alliance is here depicted. Again, verses 6 through 8, Psalm 83, verses 6 through 8, is mentioned in the Old Testament. The nearest approach being coalition of the days of Jehoshaphat, which is 2 Chronicles 20, verses 1 through 12. I'll be going over that argument when I deal with the objections section of this series. It is still more difficult to fit this confederacy into the prophetic future of either versus future invasion of Ezekiel 38, probably before the tribulation, or that of the Antichrist and his invading hordes at Armageddon at the end of the tribulation. He quotes the verses Revelation 16 and 19. But he summarizes by saying probably its fulfillment will come in some pan-Arabic coalition and attack on the Israeli state before the church is taken out, or at least before Daniel's 70th week begins. So he thinks it could even happen before the tribulation, before Daniel's 70th week begins. Next, I want to show you a short clip from Walter C. Kaiser on a teaching he did called The People of Psalm 83 at Dallas Theological Seminary now. Walter Kaiser is a distinguished professor of the Old Testament and president emeritus of Gordon Cornwall Theological Seminary. And as he concludes this short clip, he says he actually believes that we might see the fulfillment of Psalm 83 in our day.
This did not appear to be part of the Russian-Iranian war of Gog-Magog. That's Ezekiel 38, 39. That's coming too. Nor did it seem to fit the invasion of Israel in the campaign of Armageddon in Revelation 19. If you're in Bible Study Fellowship, that lesson's coming up. For none of the nations mentioned in Psalm 83 appear either in Gog-Magog or in the list of nations in Armageddon. So this seems to be a third final great war. But the nations bordering Israel right now, in the fuss that's going on in Syria and in Lebanon and in Tyre and in Byblos and in Damascus and in Jordan and in the Hamas and in the Gaza Strip and even whatever Assyria stands for, that's where we are at this moment. I expect in the providence of God that this psalm may be fulfilled in our day.
I'm going to conclude part one with this quote, this final quote here from Dr. David Reagan in his book entitled The Nine Wars of the Bible, which came out in 2023. And here's what he says about Psalm 83. Personally, I've come to the following conclusions. There's no biblical fulfillment of Psalm 83. In other words, it's not been historically fulfilled. It remains unfulfilled. He goes on to say the complete fulfillment of Psalm 83 is most likely in the future, serving as the event that will bring a brief time of peace to Israel, as well as expanded territory and increased wealth. The Psalm 83 war will most likely pave the way for the war of Gog and Magog, probably because the outcome will prompt Arab nations to call for Russia and its Muslim allies to come to their aid. So David Reagan also concurs that it's before Ezekiel 38 and that it's a future war prophecy that is not historically fulfilled. So we've come to the end of part one of this video series, and I wanted to conclude with some of those quotes because some of my critics have accused me of having a wild imagination, that my interpretations of Psalm 83 is based upon imaginative thinking. But as you can see from those quotes, that some of these scholars, even before my books were released, were teaching the same thing. As we go into the next part two, the next segment, we'll be talking about some of the objectives. We introduce and explore Psalm 83 and explain why it's a prayer and a prophecy. So stay tuned for part two.